The morning of October 12, 1989, should have been just another day of adventure for David and Sarah Mitchell as they explored the remote expanses of the Mojave Desert in southeastern California. Instead, it became the beginning of one of the most baffling disappearance cases in American desert exploration history. A mystery that would remain unsolved for 35 years until a tent buried under decades of sand would finally reveal its impossible secrets. Two people vanished without a trace that autumn morning, two lives that simply evaporated into the vast emptiness of America's most unforgiving landscape, leaving behind only questions, theories, and a puzzle that would haunt investigators and desert rescue specialists for more than 3 decades. David Mitchell, 34, was an experienced geologist from Boulder, Colorado, and Sarah Mitchell, 31, was a photographer specializing in extreme environments. Together, they had embarked on what should have been a routine scientific expedition to document rare mineral formations in one of the Mojave's most isolated regions. But something went terribly wrong in the heart of the American desert. David Mitchell was a respected researcher with the United States Geological Survey who had been conducting fieldwork in desert environments for over a decade. His expertise in desert geology and survival skills were legendary among his colleagues. He had published numerous papers on desert mineral formations and had successfully completed solo expeditions in some of the world's most challenging arid environments, including the Atacama Desert in Chile and parts of the Sahara in Morocco. Sarah Mitchell was equally accomplished in her field. As a National Geographic photographer, she had documented some of the most remote and dangerous locations on Earth. Her portfolio included award-winning work from the Antarctic, the Amazon rainforest, and various desert regions across the globe. She was known for her meticulous preparation and her ability to capture stunning images in conditions that would defeat less experienced photographers. The couple had been married for 8 years, and their shared passion for extreme environments had taken them on expeditions to 6 continents. They were known among the adventure community as a perfect team. David's scientific expertise, combined with Sarah's artistic vision and technical photography skills, made them sought-after collaborators for both scientific journals and popular magazines. Their October 1989 expedition had been planned for months. David had identified a previously unstudied geological formation approximately 80 miles northeast of Barstow, California, deep in the Mojave National Preserve area that wouldn't officially become a national preserve for another 5 years. The formation, which David had spotted on aerial geological surveys, showed unusual mineral compositions that could provide new insights into the desert's geological history. Sarah had been commissioned by Outdoor Photography magazine to document the expedition and create a photo essay about the hidden beauty of America's desert wilderness. The assignment was particularly meaningful to her because it combined her love of desert landscapes with the opportunity to work alongside her husband on a significant scientific discovery. They had driven from their home in Boulder on October 8, 1989, towing a specialized trailer equipped with geological sampling equipment, photography gear, and supplies for a 10-day desert expedition. Their destination was a remote area accessible only by a network of dirt roads and off-road trails that stretched deep into the uninhabited heart of the Mojave. The couple had extensive experience with desert survival and had prepared meticulously for the expedition. Their gear included satellite communication equipment, cutting-edge technology for 1989, backup water supplies calculated for twice their expected duration in the field, and redundant navigation systems, including GPS units that were just becoming available to civilian researchers. They had established a base camp on October 9th at the coordinates David had identified from aerial surveys. The location was approximately 15 miles from the nearest maintained road and nearly 50 miles from the closest human habitation. It was the kind of profound isolation that serious desert researchers sought, far enough from civilization to study pristine geological formations, but accessible enough for safe extraction with their four-wheel drive vehicles. The first 2 days of their expedition proceeded exactly according to plan. David collected extensive geological samples, while Sarah documented the remarkable landscape with her cameras. Her photographs from those first 2 days, later recovered from their base camp, showed breathtaking images of mineral formations that seemed to change color depending on the angle of the desert sun. On October 11th, their final day of scheduled fieldwork, David made a discovery that would alter the course of their expedition and ultimately lead to their disappearance. While examining a particularly unusual rock formation approximately 2 miles from their base camp, David found what appeared to be artificial structures partially buried in the sand. The structures weren't recent. They appeared to have been covered by sand for decades, possibly since the early 1900s. But what made them remarkable was their apparent preservation, despite being exposed to nearly a century of desert conditions. Sarah's photographs from that day showed what looked like the remains of buildings or installations made from an unknown metallic material that showed no signs of corrosion despite obvious age. The structures had geometric patterns that didn't match any known architectural styles from the early 20th century, and they seemed to be arranged in a perfect circle covering several acres of desert floor. That evening, back at their base camp, David made a satellite phone call to his supervisor at the USGS, Dr. Robert Harrison, to report his unusual discovery. The conversation was recorded as part of standard USGS field research protocols. "Bob, I've found something out here that doesn't match anything in the geological surveys." David's voice came through clearly, despite the distance. "These aren't natural formations, and they're definitely not modern installations. They look like some kind of abandoned research facility, but the construction materials and architectural style don't match anything from the known history of this area." Dr. Harrison encouraged David to document everything thoroughly and suggested extending their expedition by a few days to conduct more detailed surveys of the site. "Sarah's getting incredible photographs," David continued, "but there's something strange about this place. The mineral composition of the surrounding rocks doesn't match the known geology of this region. It's like this site exists in a geological bubble that's completely different from the surrounding desert." That was the last communication anyone would receive from David and Sarah Mitchell. On October 15th, 1989, when the couple failed to return to Boulder as scheduled, Dr. Harrison contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office to report them overdue. Search and rescue operations began immediately, coordinated between multiple agencies, including the Sheriff's Office, the California Highway Patrol, and the National Park Service. The search teams found David and Sarah's base camp exactly where they had established it on October 9th. The camp appeared to have been abandoned in an orderly fashion. Their main tent was properly secured, equipment was organized and stored appropriately, and there were no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Their vehicles were parked in their designated positions, with keys in the ignitions, but David and Sarah were nowhere to be found. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office took charge of the investigation. A 20-year veteran of law enforcement with extensive experience in desert search and rescue operations, Detective Santos had supervised dozens of cases involving missing persons in the Mojave Desert. But something about the Mitchell disappearance struck her as uniquely puzzling from the very beginning. "Everything about their camp suggests they intended to return," Detective Santos noted in her initial report. "Their valuable equipment was left unsecured, including cameras worth thousands of dollars and scientific instruments that would be irreplaceable in the field. These aren't the actions of people who were planning to abandon their expedition." The search teams quickly located the area where David had made his mysterious discovery. The site was exactly as he had described in his phone call to Dr. Harrison. Partially buried structures arranged in a perfect circle, constructed from an unknown metallic material that showed no signs of weathering or corrosion. But when the search teams examined the site more closely, they found something that deepened the mystery considerably. Footprints from David and Sarah's hiking boots led directly to the center of the circular arrangement of structures, but there were no footprints leading away from the site. The surrounding sand showed no signs of disturbance beyond the couple's approach to the mysterious installation. It was as if David and Sarah Mitchell had simply vanished into thin air while standing in the center of the ancient structures they had discovered. Search teams expanded their efforts to cover a radius of 25 miles around the couple's last known location. They employed helicopters with thermal imaging equipment, ground teams with search dogs, and even experimental satellite imaging technology that was just becoming available to law enforcement in 1989. They found absolutely nothing. No additional footprints, no traces of clothing or equipment, no indication of where two experienced desert researchers could have gone after reaching the mysterious circular structure. The couple had simply ceased to exist somewhere between their base camp and the strange archaeological discovery that had captured their attention. Dr. Harrison arrived from Boulder to assist with the search and to examine David's geological samples and Sarah's photographs. What he found in their documented work added another layer of mystery to an already baffling case. David's geological samples don't make sense, Dr. Harrison told Detective Santos during a briefing 3 days into the search. The mineral compositions he collected aren't consistent with known Mojave Desert geology. Some of these samples contain elements that shouldn't exist in this environment, and others show crystalline structures that I've never seen in 25 years of geological research. Sarah's photographs were equally puzzling. While her images of the landscape and known geological formations were consistent with expected Mojave Desert environments, her final photographs of the mysterious structures showed architectural details that didn't match any known construction methods from the early 20th century. The metallic material in these structures appears to be seamless, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, a metallurgist brought in to analyze Sarah's photographs. There are no visible welds, joints, or construction seams. It's as if these buildings were formed from single pieces of metal, which isn't possible with any known construction techniques from that era. More disturbing were some of Sarah's final photographs, which appeared to show the structures partially illuminated by an internal light source. Since the images were taken during daylight hours and there were no known power sources in the area, the source of this illumination was completely unexplained. The search continued for 3 weeks, making it one of the most extensive missing person operations in Mojave Desert history. Over 200 volunteers joined professional search teams, covering more than 500 square miles of desert terrain. The effort included specialized cave rescue teams, since some investigators theorized that David and Sarah might have discovered underground passages connected to the mysterious structures. But after 21 days of intensive searching, the operation was scaled back to periodic aerial surveys, and the case was reclassified as a missing persons investigation with suspected fatalities. Detective Santos never accepted this conclusion. Experienced desert researchers don't just vanish, she maintained in her final report. David and Sarah Mitchell knew how to survive in desert conditions better than most people know how to drive a car. If they had encountered a natural emergency, dehydration, injury, animal attack, we would have found traces. The complete absence of any evidence suggests something occurred that we don't have the knowledge or experience to understand. The mysterious circular structures discovered by David and Sarah were documented and surveyed by a joint team from the USGS and the Smithsonian Institution. Their findings were classified and sealed in government archives, with only a brief notation in public records indicating that unknown archaeological remains had been found at the location. Officially, the structures were deemed to be remnants of early 20th century mining operations, despite the fact that no mining claims had ever been filed in the area and the construction materials didn't match any known mining industry practices from that era. David and Sarah Mitchell's families hired private investigators and continued searching independently for several more years. David's parents established a reward fund that eventually grew to $50,000 for information leading to the discovery of their son and daughter-in-law. Sarah's sister organized annual memorial searches that brought volunteers back to the Mojave every October for nearly a decade. But as the years passed, hope began to fade. The Mitchell disappearance joined the growing list of America's unsolved desert mysteries, filed away in boxes of evidence that gathered dust in storage facilities. The couple's base camp equipment was eventually returned to their families. David's geological samples were archived at the USGS. Sarah's photographs became part of a memorial exhibition that toured photography galleries across the country, celebrated as the final work of a talented artist who had disappeared while pursuing her passion. The mysterious circular structures in the Mojave were quietly covered by sand drifts and bureaucratic classifications, becoming just another unexplained archaeological anomaly in America's vast desert regions. Detective Santos retired in 2003, taking with her the frustration of never finding answers for the Mitchell family. Dr. Harrison continued his geological research for another 15 years, but never forgot the puzzling samples that David had collected or the impossible mineral compositions they had contained. For 35 years, the truth about what happened to David and Sarah Mitchell remained buried beneath the shifting sands of the Mojave Desert, seemingly lost forever to the vast indifference of one of America's most unforgiving landscapes. But truth has a way of surfacing even in the deepest desert. On March 8, 2024, 35 years after David and Sarah Mitchell vanished, a joint expedition from the University of California, Berkeley, and the National Science Foundation arrived in the Mojave Desert to conduct studies on climate change impacts on desert ecosystems. The research team, led by Dr. Amanda Foster, a climatologist specializing in arid environment research, had chosen the same general area where the Mitchells had disappeared because it represented one of the most pristine and undisturbed desert research environments in the American Southwest. Dr. Foster's team was using ground-penetrating radar technology to study changes in desert soil composition over time when they made a discovery that would reopen one of the Mojave's most famous unsolved mysteries. The radar equipment detected something unexpected, buried approximately 8 feet beneath the desert surface, a large, regularly shaped object that appeared to be artificial in origin. Initially, we thought we had found buried debris from old mining operations, Dr. Foster later explained, but the size and shape of the radar signature didn't match typical industrial waste patterns. Undine, when the team began carefully excavating the site, they found something that none of them had expected: a camping tent, perfectly preserved despite being buried under sand for decades. But this wasn't just any tent. It was a high-quality expedition tent of the type used by serious desert researchers, and it appeared to be in pristine condition despite obvious age. Most remarkably, there was a faint glow visible through the tent fabric, as if battery-powered lights were still operating inside. Dr. Foster immediately contacted the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office, and within hours, Detective Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez, Detective Santos's successor in the Desert Search and Rescue Unit, arrived at the site with a team of specialists. When they carefully opened the tent, they found something that defied all logical explanation. The interior of the tent was exactly as it would have appeared in 1989. Two sleeping bags were laid out as if their occupants had just stepped outside for a morning walk. Personal belongings were arranged normally: books, cameras, scientific instruments, and camping equipment, all positioned as they would be in an active camp. Most impossibly, battery-powered lanterns were still glowing with steady light, despite the fact that standard camping batteries from 1989 should have died within days or weeks of the couple's disappearance. But David and Sarah Mitchell were not in the tent. A metal plate attached to the tent's interior confirmed what investigators had suspected. This was the missing equipment from the 1989 Mitchell expedition. Serial numbers matched perfectly with the inventory that had been recorded when their base camp was discovered 35 years earlier. But how had the tent ended up buried 8 feet underground? How were the lights still functioning after more than 3 decades? And where were David and Sarah? The discovery of the buried tent reopened the Mitchell case officially for the first time in 35 years. Detective Ramirez assembled a team that included original investigators from the 1989 case, current desert search specialists, and scientists from multiple disciplines who might be able to explain the impossible preservation of the camp and its equipment. We're dealing with something that challenges our understanding of both desert environments and the passage of time, Detective Ramirez stated during the first press conference about the reopened case. Finding a tent buried under 8 feet of sand with working lights after 35 years isn't just unusual, it's scientifically impossible under normal circumstances. The discovery also renewed interest in the mysterious circular structures that David and Sarah had been investigating when they disappeared. Using modern satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar, researchers located the structures beneath sand drifts that had accumulated over the decades since 1989. What they found would challenge everything they thought they knew about the history of the Mojave Desert and the fate of David and Sarah Mitchell. The structures weren't remnants of early 20th century mining operations, as had been officially determined in 1989. They were far older, possibly dating back thousands of years, and they showed evidence of technologies that shouldn't have existed in any known ancient civilization. More disturbing, the structures appeared to still be active. Electromagnetic readings from the site showed patterns of energy that had no known natural explanation. The metallic materials that composed the structures were conducting and storing electrical energy from an unknown source, creating a localized electromagnetic field that covered several square miles of desert. Dr. Foster's team discovered that this electromagnetic field had unique properties. Objects placed within its influence seemed to experience time differently than objects outside the field. Atomic clocks synchronized with national time standards began showing minute but consistent deviations when brought near the circular structures. We're looking at what appears to be a localized temporal anomaly, explained Dr. James Wright, a theoretical physicist brought in to study the phenomenon. The electromagnetic field generated by these structures appears to be creating a bubble where time moves differently than in the surrounding environment. This discovery provided a possible explanation for the impossible preservation of David and Sarah's tent and equipment. If the tent had been caught within the temporal anomaly field, time would have moved more slowly for the objects inside the field than for the outside world. 35 years in normal time might have been only days or weeks within the temporal bubble created by the mysterious structures. But this raised even more disturbing questions. If David and Sarah had discovered this temporal anomaly in 1989, and if their equipment had been preserved within it for 35 years, where were they? Were they still alive somewhere within the time distortion field? Had they aged normally, or were they still effectively living in 1989? The search for David and Sarah Mitchell was about to enter a new phase that would challenge not only the investigators' understanding of desert survival, but their understanding of time, space, and the nature of reality itself. And somewhere in the electromagnetic maze of ancient structures buried beneath the Mojave sand, two desert researchers who had vanished in 1989 might still be trying to find their way home. The investigation into the temporal anomaly surrounding the buried tent quickly became one of the most classified scientific studies in modern American history. Dr. Amanda Foster's initial climate research expedition had stumbled upon something that challenged fundamental understanding of physics, archaeology, and the nature of time itself. Within 48 hours of the tent's discovery, the site was cordoned off by federal authorities and declared a restricted research area under the jurisdiction of the Department of Energy's Advanced Scientific Research Division. Dr. James Wright, the theoretical physicist brought in to study the electromagnetic anomaly, had spent his career researching theoretical temporal mechanics at MIT, but the phenomenon he encountered in the Mojave Desert was beyond anything he had studied in academia. "What we're dealing with here isn't theoretical," Dr. Wright explained to the assembled team of investigators and scientists on March 12, 2024. "This is an active, functioning temporal distortion field that appears to have been operating for decades, possibly centuries or even millennia." The field measurements were unprecedented. Using equipment borrowed from CERN and the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, Dr. Wright's team had mapped the precise boundaries of the temporal anomaly. The field formed a perfect circle with a diameter of exactly 7 kilometers, centered on the mysterious ancient structures that David and Sarah Mitchell had discovered in 1989. Within this circle, time moved at approximately 73% the rate of normal time. This meant that for every hour that passed in the outside world, only about 44 minutes passed within the temporal field. "The mathematical implications are staggering," Dr. Wright continued. "If David and Sarah Mitchell entered this field in October 1989, they would have experienced approximately 25 years, while the outside world experienced 35 years. From their perspective, the current date would be sometime in early 2015. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. If the calculations were correct, David and Sarah might still be alive within the temporal field, having aged only about 3/4 as much as the outside world during their disappearance. But locating them within the 7-kilometer circle of distorted time presented challenges that no search and rescue operation had ever faced. Detective Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez coordinated with federal authorities to establish a base camp at the edge of the temporal field. The camp was equipped with the most advanced communication and monitoring equipment available, including experimental quantum communication devices that might be able to maintain contact across temporal boundaries. "We're essentially planning a rescue mission into the past," Detective Ramirez explained to his team. "Standard search and rescue protocols don't apply when the people you're looking for are living in a different timeline." The first attempts to enter the temporal field were conducted with unmanned drones, equipped with cameras and communication equipment. The results were immediately fascinating and deeply concerning. Drones entering the field appeared to slow down dramatically from the perspective of outside observers. A drone flying at 50 miles per hour would appear to be moving at only 36 miles per hour once it crossed into the temporal anomaly. But from the drone's perspective, as recorded by its onboard systems, it continued moving at normal speed while the outside world appeared to accelerate. More troubling, communication with the drones became increasingly unreliable the deeper they penetrated into the field. Radio signals appeared to be affected by the temporal distortion, creating lag times and interference patterns that made real-time control impossible. Dr. Chen, the metallurgist who had analyzed Sarah's 1989 photographs, made another disturbing discovery when she examined the tent that had been buried for 35 years. The tent fabric and equipment show signs of wear consistent with continuous use, she reported. These aren't objects that have been sitting unused for decades. Someone has been living in this tent recently, within the past few months, based on the wear patterns and equipment conditions. This evidence suggested that David and Sarah might indeed still be alive within the temporal field, and that they had been surviving in the desert environment for what they would have experienced as about 25 years. But where were they now? The answer came when Dr. Foster's team conducted a more detailed excavation around the buried tent site. Using archaeological techniques combined with ground-penetrating radar, they uncovered evidence of a camp that had been continuously occupied for decades. Beneath the sand, arranged in a careful pattern around the tent location, they found a network of survival installations that demonstrated remarkable ingenuity and long-term planning. Underground water collection systems channeled rare desert rainfall into storage tanks made from improvised materials. Solar collection devices, clearly constructed from cannibalized scientific equipment, provided electrical power for the camp's systems. Most remarkably, they found a communication array that appeared to have been built using components from David's geological equipment and Sarah's photography gear, combined with materials salvaged from the mysterious ancient structures. This isn't a survival camp, Dr. Foster realized. This is a research station. David and Sarah didn't just survive in the temporal field, they've been studying it for 25 years. The communication array provided the key to the next phase of the investigation. Dr. Wright's team analyzed the improvised equipment and determined that it was designed to send and receive signals across temporal boundaries. David and Sarah had apparently spent decades learning to work with the time distortion field, developing their own methods for communicating with the outside world. On March 18, 2024, exactly 10 days after the tent's discovery, Dr. Wright successfully activated David and Sarah's communication array. The first message they received was a voice transmission that sent chills through everyone at the base camp. "This is David Mitchell, day 9127 of our expedition. If anyone is receiving this transmission, we are alive and well, but trapped within a temporal anomaly in the Mojave Desert. We have established a stable survival situation and have made significant discoveries about the nature of this phenomenon." Day 9127. By David's count, he and Sarah had been in the temporal field for exactly 25 years and 11 days, precisely matching Dr. Wright's calculations about the time differential. The voice was clearly David's, but aged. The man speaking sounded like someone in his late 50s or early 60s, which was consistent with normal aging from age 34 to approximately 60. "Sarah and I have determined that the temporal distortion is caused by technology embedded in ancient structures that predate any known human civilization in North America." David's recorded message continued. "We have been studying these structures and have made contact with their creators." Made contact with their creators. This revelation added an entirely new dimension to the mystery. Over the next several days, Dr. Wright's team established regular communication with David and Sarah through their improvised system. What they learned challenged not only their understanding of the couple's disappearance, but their understanding of human history itself. David and Sarah had indeed survived their initial entry into the temporal field in 1989, but rather than trying to escape, they had chosen to stay and study the phenomenon they had discovered. Over the course of what they had experienced as 25 years, they had gradually learned to work with the ancient technology that created the temporal anomaly. "The structures aren't abandoned," Sarah's voice came through during one of their communication sessions. They're automated systems left by a civilization that existed here thousands of years before any known human presence in North America. The systems are designed to preserve and protect this location across geological timescales. The couple had gradually gained access to the control systems for the ancient technology. They had learned that the temporal field was not an accident or malfunction, but a deliberate preservation system designed to create a stable environment that could survive climate changes, geological shifts, and other environmental catastrophes over millennia. "We've seen this place as it was thousands of years ago," David explained during another transmission. "The temporal field doesn't just slow down time, it provides access to different temporal states. We've witnessed this desert when it was a lush grassland, when it was covered by ancient lakes, and when it was home to civilizations that left no other archaeological traces. But the most extraordinary revelation was yet to come. During a communication session on March 25th, Sarah revealed something that would rewrite the understanding of North American prehistory. The beings who built this place weren't human, but they weren't alien either. They were Earth natives, a species that evolved here millions of years before humans appeared. They built temporal preservation sites like this one across the planet before their civilization ended approximately 50,000 years ago. According to Sarah and David's 25 years of research within the temporal field, these ancient beings had created a network of temporal preservation sites designed to maintain records of Earth's biological and geological history across deep time. The Mojave site was one of dozens scattered across North America, most of them now buried or destroyed by geological activity. The preservation system is designed to activate when it detects potential threats to the historical record, David explained. Environmental catastrophes, mass extinctions, major climate changes. The system responds by creating temporal fields that can preserve important biological and geological samples across the crisis period. The system had activated in response to their presence in 1989 because David's geological samples and Sarah's photographs represented the type of scientific data that the preservation protocol was designed to protect. The temporal field had essentially captured them to ensure that their research would survive potential future catastrophes. "We've become part of the preservation system," Sarah revealed. "Our research, our documentation of this place, our survival story, it's all being stored by the ancient technology as part of Earth's historical record." This explained why their tent and equipment had been so perfectly preserved, and why they had been able to survive for decades in the harsh desert environment. The ancient technology had been supporting their survival while using their knowledge and experiences to update its database of human civilization. But the system had also trapped them. While they could move freely within the 2.7-kilometer temporal field, any attempt to leave the area resulted in severe temporal displacement effects that made escape impossible. "We've tried to leave hundreds of times over the years," David admitted, "but the temporal differential at the field boundary creates a kind of elastic effect. Try to exit, and you get pulled back to your temporal starting point within the field." However, David and Sarah had discovered something that offered hope for both rescue and scientific breakthrough. The preservation system had protocols for releasing preserved subjects when specific conditions were met. The system is designed to release preserved materials when the external threat that triggered preservation has passed, or when contact is established with a sufficiently advanced external civilization, Sarah explained. The contact that Dr. Wright's team had established with David and Sarah was being interpreted by the ancient system as evidence that human civilization had reached a sufficient level of technological sophistication to safely interact with the preservation technology. "The system has been monitoring your communications and your scientific equipment," David revealed. Your quantum communication devices, your temporal measurement instruments, your understanding of the physics involved. The system recognizes this as evidence of significant technological advancement. This meant that rescue might be possible, but it would require working with the ancient preservation system rather than against it. Over the next week, Dr. Wright collaborated with David and Sarah to develop a release protocol that would satisfy the preservation system's requirements while safely extracting the couple from the temporal field. The process would be complex and dangerous. It would require precise coordination between the outside team's quantum communication equipment and the ancient control systems that David and Sarah had learned to operate. Most critically, it would require the outside team to demonstrate that they could safely preserve and continue the research that David and Sarah had conducted over their 25 years in the temporal field. The system won't release us unless it's confident that our research will be preserved and continued, Sarah explained. We've become the custodians of 50,000 years of Earth history stored in these structures. The preservation protocol won't let us leave unless we can transfer that responsibility to a qualified external team. Dr. Wright's team began working with major universities and government research institutions to establish a permanent scientific station at the Mojave site. The facility would be dedicated to studying the temporal preservation technology and maintaining the historical databases that David and Sarah had been protecting for 25 years. But as they prepared for the extraction attempt, Dr. Wright made a discovery that would complicate everything. The temporal field was not stable. After 35 years of operation, the ancient technology was beginning to show signs of degradation. The field strength was fluctuating, and the time differential was becoming unpredictable. "We have a limited window," Dr. Wright warned the team. "The preservation system is failing. If we don't extract David and Sarah soon, the temporal field could collapse entirely, trapping them permanently in a time loop or worse. The failure of the temporal field could release decades of stored energy in an uncontrolled discharge that could devastate the surrounding desert and destroy the irreplaceable historical data that the preservation system had been protecting for millennia. The rescue of David and Sarah Mitchell had become a race against time itself, literally. And the stakes were not just 2 lives, but the preservation of 50,000 years of Earth's hidden history and the safety of everyone within hundreds of miles of the failing temporal anomaly. The final extraction attempt would require everything that human science had learned about temporal physics, combined with the ancient wisdom of a vanished civilization and the survival expertise of 2 researchers who had spent 25 years living between time itself. But first, Dr. Wright's team had to solve a problem that neither modern science nor ancient technology had anticipated: how to safely shut down a failing temporal preservation system without destroying everything it had been designed to protect. The answer would lie in the final secrets that David and Sarah had discovered during their decades of isolation in the time field. Secrets about the true purpose of the preservation network and its connection to future threats that humanity had not yet imagined. The final extraction attempt began at dawn on April 15, 2024, exactly 5 weeks after Dr. Amanda Foster's team had discovered the impossible tent buried beneath 8 feet of Mojave sand. The operation, codenamed Temporal Bridge, represented the most complex rescue mission in human history, an attempt to extract 2 people from a failing time distortion field that had held them for 35 years while they aged only 25. Dr. James Wright had spent the previous 3 weeks coordinating with quantum physicists from around the world to develop extraction protocols that could safely interface with technology that predated human civilization by 50,000 years. The margin for error was essentially 0. A single miscalculation could trap David and Sarah permanently in a collapsing temporal loop, or worse, release enough stored temporal energy to devastate hundreds of square miles of California desert. "We have one opportunity," Dr. Wright explained to the assembled team during the final briefing. "The ancient preservation system has agreed to release David and Sarah, but only if we can demonstrate that we can safely assume responsibility for maintaining the historical database they've been protecting." The extraction site looked like something from a science fiction movie. Quantum communication arrays surrounded the perimeter of the temporal field. Their dishes pointed precisely at the coordinates where David and Sarah's underground research station was located. Backup power systems hummed constantly, ensuring that the delicate extraction equipment would maintain power throughout the 12-hour window that calculations showed would be necessary for safe extraction. Most imposing of all was the Temporal Interface Platform, a device that Dr. Wright's team had constructed based on specifications that David and Sarah had transmitted from within the time field. The platform was designed to create a stable bridge between normal time and the accelerated timeline within the preservation system. Detective Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez had coordinated with federal authorities to establish a 5-mile exclusion zone around the extraction site. Emergency evacuation plans were in place for the cities of Barstow and Victorville, just in case the extraction attempt triggered an uncontrolled temporal energy discharge. At exactly 6 a.m. Pacific time, Dr. Wright initiated contact with David and Sarah for the final pre-extraction communication. "David, Sarah, this is Dr. Wright. All systems are ready for extraction. What's your status inside the field?" David's voice came through clearly, but there was tension in his tone that hadn't been present in previous communications. "Jim, we're ready, but there's something we need to tell you before we proceed. Something we discovered about the preservation network that changes everything." Dr. Wright felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of discovery?" "The preservation system isn't just storing historical data." Sarah's voice joined the transmission. "It's been preparing for something, a future event that the ancient civilization detected before their extinction." Over the next several minutes, David and Sarah revealed the final piece of the puzzle that explained why the preservation network had been built and why their extraction was so critically important. The ancient non-human civilization that had constructed the temporal preservation sites had possessed technology capable of detecting future threats across geological timescales. Their final act before extinction had been to create the preservation network, not just to store historical data, but to prepare Earth's future civilizations for a specific catastrophic event. "They detected something approaching Earth from deep space," David explained. "An object or phenomenon that will arrive sometime in the next century and will pose an existential threat to all life on the planet. The preservation network was designed to ensure that future civilizations would have access to the knowledge and technology needed to survive this event." The preservation sites across the planet weren't just museums of Earth's past. They were preparation centers for humanity's future survival. "The system has been evaluating human technological development for decades," Sarah continued. "Our capture in 1989 was partly accidental, but it was also a test. The preservation system needed to determine if humanity had developed enough to be trusted with the survival protocols." This revelation explained why the extraction was only now possible. The ancient system had determined that human technology in 2024 had finally reached a sufficient level of sophistication to begin preparing for the approaching threat. But it also meant that David and Sarah's extraction was just the beginning of humanity's involvement with the preservation network. They weren't just rescuing 2 lost researchers. They were accepting responsibility for preparing civilization for a future crisis that could determine the survival of all life on Earth. Are you saying that humanity is about to be contacted by this ancient preservation network? Dr. Wright asked. Not contacted, David replied. Activated. The preservation sites around the world are preparing to come online. The network has determined that the approaching threat is close enough that preparation protocols need to begin immediately. Dr. Wright realized that the rescue mission had just become something far more significant than saving 2 lives. They were participating in the activation of a planetary defense system that had been dormant for millennia. We need to proceed with the extraction immediately, Dr. Wright decided. David, Sarah, are you ready? We're ready, they replied in unison. But Jim, there's one more thing. The extraction process is going to change us. 25 years of exposure to temporal field effects has altered our physiology in ways we don't fully understand. We're not going to be exactly the same people who entered this field in 1989. At 7:30 a.m., the extraction sequence began. The temporal interface platform powered up with a sound like reality itself humming. Electromagnetic fields visible to the naked eye began forming geometric patterns in the air above the ancient structures buried beneath the sand. The quantum communication arrays focused their signals on the precise coordinates where David and Sarah waited within their underground research station. From the perspective of outside observers, the extraction appeared to occur in slow motion. Shimmering distortions in the air marked the boundaries of the temporal field, as the ancient preservation system began the complex process of synchronizing 2 different time streams. Dr. Wright monitored the extraction from a control station filled with instruments that measured electromagnetic fields, temporal distortions, and quantum entanglement patterns that had never been observed by human science before. Temporal synchronization at 15%, 30%, 45%. Dr. Wright called out readings as the ancient technology slowly bridged the gap between the accelerated time within the field and normal time outside. At 60% synchronization, something extraordinary happened. 2 figures became visible within the shimmering distortions of the temporal field boundary, but they weren't walking toward the extraction point. They were floating, surrounded by the same geometric light patterns that had been generated by the ancient structures. David and Sarah Mitchell emerged from the temporal field not as ordinary humans, but as something transformed by their 25 years of exposure to technologies that predated human civilization by millennia. They appeared to be in their late 50s, as expected from the time differential calculations, but their eyes had changed. They now showed flecks of the same metallic coloration as the ancient structures they had been studying. Their movements seemed to operate partially outside normal time, creating brief afterimages as they walked. Most remarkably, they were accompanied by geometric patterns of light that appeared to be some kind of technological interface with the preservation system itself. David, Sarah, Dr. Wright called out as they approached the extraction point. We're here, Jim, David replied, but his voice had harmonics that hadn't been present before. But we're not just us anymore. The preservation system has integrated us into its protocols. We're now permanently connected to the survival network. Sarah stepped forward, and as she moved, the light patterns around her shifted and changed, displaying information in languages and symbols that predated human writing. We've become interface nodes for the preservation network. We can access the stored knowledge of 50,000 years of Earth history, and we can communicate directly with preservation sites around the world. This transformation had been the final requirement for the preservation system to release them. They hadn't just survived within the temporal field, they had become permanent components of the ancient survival network. But rather than being trapped, they had gained abilities that would be essential for humanity's preparation for the approaching cosmic threat. The network is activating preservation sites in the Sahara, the Himalayas, the Amazon, and the Antarctic, David explained, his transformed senses apparently receiving real-time information from around the planet. Each site contains different elements of the survival protocols. Humanity has approximately 75 years to prepare. Dr. Wright's instruments detected massive electromagnetic signatures activating at locations around the globe. The extraction of David and Sarah had triggered the activation of the entire planetary preservation network for the first time in 50,000 years. Over the next several hours, reports began arriving from around the world of unexplained phenomena occurring at remote locations that matched the geographical pattern David and Sarah were describing. Ancient structures were emerging from ice in Antarctica. Buried installations were being uncovered by sandstorms in the Sahara. Mountain peaks in the Himalayas were exhibiting electromagnetic anomalies. The preservation network was revealing itself to humanity, but the activation came with a price. The Mojave site, having served its function as the initial contact point, was beginning to shut down. The temporal field was dissipating, and the ancient structures were gradually going dormant as their stored energy was transferred to sites around the world. This site was designed to be a one-time activation node, Sarah explained, as the geometric light patterns around her began to fade. Its purpose was to identify and prepare the interface nodes, us, and to initiate contact with humanity when the time was right. The extraction had succeeded, but the Mojave temporal anomaly that had preserved David and Sarah for 35 years was ending forever. Dr. Wright watched as the electromagnetic readings from the ancient structures gradually decreased to zero. The site that had challenged everything scientists thought they knew about time and archaeology was returning to ordinary desert geology. But the real work was just beginning. David and Sarah, now permanently transformed by their integration with the preservation network, would spend the rest of their lives serving as humanity's liaisons to the ancient survival system. They would coordinate with researchers around the world to unlock the knowledge stored at each preservation site and begin preparing Earth's civilizations for the cosmic threat that was still decades away. What exactly is this threat? Dr. Wright asked as the formal debriefing began. Sarah's transformed senses accessed information stored in the network's databases for 50 millennia. It's a gravitational anomaly moving through space at a significant percentage of light speed. When it passes through our solar system in approximately 75 years, it will disrupt planetary orbits and trigger massive climate instabilities. The ancient civilization had faced the same phenomenon 50,000 years ago and had survived by using temporal preservation technology to maintain pockets of stable environment through the crisis period. But they had recognized that future civilizations might develop different survival strategies, and they had built the network to provide options rather than dictating solutions. The preservation sites contain technologies for atmospheric control, geological stabilization, and space-based civilization development, David explained. But the specific survival strategy will depend on the technological capabilities that humanity develops over the next 7 decades. Dr. Wright realized that the rescue of David and Sarah Mitchell had inadvertently become humanity's first contact with a legacy left by Earth's previous intelligent species, a species that had dedicated their final years to ensuring that future civilizations would have the tools needed to survive the cosmic catastrophe that had destroyed them. Over the following months, the discovery of David and Sarah and the activation of the preservation network became the most significant scientific development in human history. The transformed couple worked with teams of researchers at each newly activated site, translating alien technologies and ancient survival protocols into forms that human science could understand and adapt. The couple's families had to adjust to the reality that David and Sarah had returned as something more than human, but also something other than the people who had vanished in 1989. Their transformation by the ancient technology had given them capabilities that were essential for humanity's future survival, but it had also placed them permanently outside normal human experience. David's parents, now in their 90s, were overjoyed to see their son alive, but struggled to understand the geometric light patterns that sometimes surrounded him when he accessed the preservation network. Sarah's sister had to accept that her sibling now possessed access to 50,000 years of stored knowledge, but would never again be able to live an ordinary human life. The couple had aged only 25 years during their 35-year disappearance, but they had gained lifespans that would extend far beyond normal human limits. The preservation technology had essentially made them immortal, ensuring that they would be available to guide humanity through the approaching crisis and whatever challenges might follow. Detective Lieutenant Carlos Ramirez officially closed the Mitchell missing persons case, but the paperwork barely captured the reality of what had occurred. How do you file a report explaining that 2 missing researchers had been found alive after 35 years, transformed into interfaces for an ancient alien survival network designed to prepare humanity for a cosmic catastrophe? The tent that had started the entire investigation, the impossible camping equipment found buried under sand with lights still glowing after decades, was preserved in the Smithsonian Institution as the artifact that had revealed humanity's connection to Earth's and previous intelligent species. Dr. Amanda Foster's climate research expedition, which had accidentally discovered the buried tent, evolved into the Temporal Archaeology Institute, dedicated to studying the preservation sites around the world and preparing for the cosmic threat that would arrive sometime in the late 21st century. The Mojave site itself, now dormant after serving its function as humanity's introduction to the preservation network, became a memorial and research center. Visitors could walk through the area where David and Sarah had spent 25 years living between normal time and accelerated time, studying technologies that predated human civilization and preparing for their role as humanity's guides to survival. But the most remarkable aspect of the entire story was how David and Sarah adapted to their transformed existence. Despite their integration with ancient technology and their access to vast stores of knowledge, they remained recognizably themselves. Their love for each other had survived not just 35 years of separation from normal human society, but transformation into something beyond ordinary humanity. They established a home base near the site of their original disappearance, where they could maintain their connection to the preservation network while still experiencing some approximation of normal life. David continued his geological research, but now with access to 50,000 years of planetary data. Sarah resumed photography, capturing images of the ancient sites as they activated around the world. Their story became an inspiration for humanity's preparation for the cosmic threat. 2 people who had vanished into the desert in 1989 had returned as proof that survival was possible, that love could endure across time itself, and that Earth's previous intelligent species had cared enough about future civilizations to spend their final years preparing tools for survival. The couple who had vanished during a desert trip in 1989 had returned not just as survivors, but as harbingers of humanity's greatest challenge and its greatest opportunity. Their tent, found buried under sand with lights impossibly still glowing after 35 years, had been the key that unlocked humanity's inheritance from Earth's deep past and its preparation for an uncertain but survivable future. And somewhere in the vast network of preservation sites now activating around the planet, ancient technologies waited patiently to share the accumulated wisdom of 50,000 years with a young species that was about to face its first truly cosmic test. David and Sarah Mitchell had disappeared into the Mojave Desert as human researchers, They had returned as Earth's ambassadors to its own ancient history, carrying the keys to humanity's survival written in the language of time itself. The mystery of their disappearance had been solved, but the greater mystery of humanity's future in the cosmos was just beginning to unfold. And at the center of that unfolding story were two people whose love had proven stronger than time, whose curiosity had unlocked secrets spanning millennia, and whose survival had become the foundation for all of humanity's hopes for surviving the challenges that lay ahead. The lights in their tent had never gone out because the ancient preservation network had never stopped believing that someone would eventually find them and unlock the secrets they had been chosen to protect. And in the end, that faith across 50,000 years had proven to be humanity's greatest inheritance from Earth's forgotten past.